I used to be ashamed of my past and unsure if I'd make it to where I was going. But I knew one thing was for certain. We don't end up where we're going on accident. I've also learned that we can't erase the past or hide from it, but we can learn from it and pass it on to others. So who am I? I'm the definition of a bootstrap girl. Someone who's made the hard choices to pick themselves back up and make something of themselves. And I'm not the only one. My name is Danisha. I'm a mom, a wife, a professor, advocate, queen of my own path, who's overcome abuse, foster care, homelessness, and raising 5 siblings on my own at the age of 24. And eventually I got a PhD. But something that I learned is that I don't know everything. So here on my show, we're going to be bringing in people who know the things that we don't know. Let's get in and learn on the Dr. Danisha Keating Show.
Welcome back, everybody, to the Dr. Danisha Keating Show. I am so excited to have my friend Melody here. We are going to be talking about kind of a non-talked about topic of finding your biofamily. So, Melody, I'm going to have you introduce yourself, your whatever you want to share, and then we're going to dig in because finding the biofamily is not a conversation a lot of people are talking about and or knowing how to navigate. So, go ahead, take it over.
Very true. So my name's Melody Wells. I'm a second year student at Cornell. And I sort of entered the foster care, adoption, advocacy realm about maybe like a little over a year ago. I basically just turned my personal Instagram account into an advocacy account, and I found that I loved it, and I've just sort of been in it ever since. That's the main gist about me. I have 11 siblings, entered foster care at 4. No, not 4. Entered foster care at 4 months, was adopted at 4, and that's sort of where the whole story started. So
I'm also one of 11 bio siblings, and then I have 2 additional half siblings. So there's 13 of us. But
wow.
Okay, and you can say no. Are we allowed to talk about your mom?
Yes.
Okay.
Which mom are we talking about?
Bio.
Adoptive mom, bio. Oh, so bio mom. Yeah. So my mother's name. So my mother. Her name's Brooke.
Hey, Brooke.
She's an interesting gal. So she's sort of been off pretty much since she's been born. My grandmother's always just like, I just don't know what's up with her. She's just always had a lot of very strange tendencies. There's a little bit of autism there, so a lot of like the rocking back and forth, not understanding how to navigate social situations. And once she entered adulthood, she did get into like drug addiction, prostitution, etc. And that's sort of how me and my 2 bio siblings came about. She was prostituting, and that's how we were born. So that's a whole other situation where children of prostitutes, and it can be really tricky. So yeah.
What makes it tricky? Because people might hear that and be like, wait a minute, what?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
what
yeah.
makes it tricky?
So there's a lot. So I would say, first of all, the main thing, like me and my siblings, we constantly talk about just the fact that when you're the child of a prostitute and you know how you came to be, it really makes you question yourself, like, you already weren't meant to be here. You're the result of a very just horrible and sad industry. A lot of times, a lot of these children go into foster care. A lot of them, when they don't go into foster care, they're abused. So it's just very, it's a really tough thing to be a part of. And it's definitely something that I've had to work with when I found out. Like, I was already having to work through being adopted and, other things that I was working through.
Had trauma? Trauma.
Yes. It was like I was already going through it all, and then I find this out, and that was just a whole other thing to work with. But I would say one good thing about it is that when you have more than one sibling that was created from the same system, there's someone that you can really talk to about it. So my brother, he's 2 years older than me, and we're just able to talk about how we feel, and it's good in that way. But
so today it's glamorized. Like, that's what's crazy about it. And it's like, if you like, I personally know somebody who was prostituted out by a family member, and she's like, y'all don't understand the shame of this. Like, it is not common for us to sit in the same room as someone who was like, hey, this is what happened.
Right.
To have a child. Now, did she have a pimp too?
I don't know. Like,
we don't
the
know.
main gist with her.
Know.
Yes.
What we do
Yes.
know is that when we look up the statistics of prostitution, when we look
Yeah.
at the statistics of if they did or did not, if it was
Yes.
survival or if it was that they got trafficked, we start to see the numbers, and the numbers are high. That
Yes.
within when they surveyed children who were sex trafficked, they were 90 something percent within the foster care system. Like they were just like
Yes.
runaways. They were kidnapped and nobody cared. Like because they
Mhm.
were just like, well, we thought you ran away. But then we're going to talk about it is that abortion is very high in the prostitute world, but we don't talk about
Mhm.
it because we don't
Right.
know the statistics, because when they go to the clinic, it usually is like, hey, get it done, we're out. And so you guys are miracles. And I know that it doesn't feel like that sometimes.
Oh yeah.
And that's heartbreaking because it's like, okay, but then yes, my mom had me, but then I ended up in dangerous situations and then ended up in foster care and then ended up adopted. And so it's like trauma upon questions upon never really knowing if you're going to get the right answer. And there's I sit back and this like my heart breaks for not just you but for your mom, because then it's like, well, we don't really have the answer, but it's like, okay, and you said that there is possible autism and then maybe some other stuff going on, but at no
Yeah.
point did someone say like that we know of that was kind of like, hey, pause, like let's have a
Right.
conversation here, which may have
Right.
happened, we don't know, but we sit back and it's like you were like, hey, I'm the child of something that like I can assume not wanted.
Yes. And it's really to add to what you said about the whole glamorizing of prostitution. That's like a
It's
really,
so
really
gross.
big thing. I actually have a whole post about
Share
literally
it
the
again,
title of
girl.
the post of is literally called Why Prostitution is Harmful. A lot of times people talk about
Yeah.
prostitution and they're like, oh, like women can do what they want, but a lot of times people don't think about the children that come out of this. It's one thing if there weren't children involved, but there are
Yes.
children involved and we're put into it.
Yes.
We are put into it. We are brought into
So,
these dangerous situations.
and I don't want to dig into it because I don't want to like cause anyone to be triggered, but it is a
Yeah.
reality. A reality is that, we know things can be generational.
Yeah.
So prostitution becomes generational, and it's
Right.
not by choice. Like
Right.
regardless, like we don't know if your mom chose it or not, but what
Right.
it is it put you and your siblings in dangerous situations.
Mhm.
And it continues to perpetrate. Like we know OnlyFans exists. We know that there was that girl who recently like went around and was like, I slept with 101 guys in a day. And now
Mhm.
later her videos are now all about like recently, like that was months ago, but recently she started putting out like how she has been mentally and emotionally spiraling, where she's just
Wow.
like, this is not just that it's you can just go out and do these things and it doesn't matter. Like she's like, I feel so gross.
Right.
Then you add like, well, it's the way I make my money. And people have like, I have seen people be like, oh yeah, I'm a prostitute, like this is what I do, or like I'm a chaperone, or they call it different names now, like I'm a
Right.
lady of the night. Like we know these things, but
Mhm.
it's like
Right.
some people love it and they like they say that they love it. I don't
Mhm.
believe that that's actually true. But then there are people who are literally forced in to stay in, and they're like, well, I have kids to take care of, and then their kids are put
Right.
into danger.
Right.
So how did you like this is so hard, and I don't want to trauma you at all, like trauma
Yeah.
you. I don't know why
Trauma
that's
you. I mean, I'm pretty chill about it. It's all about
so. But
education
how did
and
you end into foster care? Like
yeah.
that just wasn't a like, okay, because your mom was a prostitute, that's why. It was like,
Yeah.
what led to that? Like what happened because
Yeah.
of the prostitution?
Yeah. So, how many you are coming in?
Not allowed on the podcast.
But
It's fine. It's gonna be in the
yeah.
recording. This is your fault.
Oh wow.
Anyways, back to serious. This is how we
So
deal with hard conversations. We're
yeah,
like, what
yeah,
was
we
that
just
about?
laugh and we work through it. So I have an older brother. He's 2 years older than me. So he was born, and basically how it worked is that when my mother would have her children, they would go to my grandmother, and my grandmother would raise them. So I am not sure who had custody of me, but I do know that once I was born, I lived with my grandmother. She was my primary caretaker, but my mother, because she doesn't have a house and also basically lives with my grandmother, she would be around. So around the point where I was 4 months old, actually what was documented in my foster care like whole case study was that her and my uncle got into a fight the police were called and they removed me, but they didn't remove my older sibling, which is where it sort of gets a little wonky there, because it's like, why did you remove one child and not both? So I'm not really sure exactly what was going on there, but that's essentially what happened. And to add to that, um, before I even saw what was in my case study, my grandmother always told me that I was removed because my mother was jealous that my grandmother was raising me. So she like basically just called the police on my grandmother for no reason and lied and said that she had like a gun. So it's, the stories vary. But essentially after I was removed,
I'm like, but our note says.
right, right. So
I was
my
like, we
grandmother,
tend to follow the notes sometimes,
right,
because sometimes those notes are
sometimes.
also shady, and you're like,
Right,
oh, okay.
exactly. Right. So my grandmother had visitation. However, she also was struggling with diabetes, so she missed one
Oh,
visitation. And
yeah.
essentially they were like, okay, you missed one, so clearly you don't want this child. And they just, I just was stuck in the system while my older brother somehow was able to
Not,
stay home. I'm sort of confused about that, and I definitely think there was something a little iffy with that.
yeah, absolutely. That sounds iffy,
Yes,
because you don't take one
exactly,
kid and not the other, and then
exactly,
for the same reasons. Like, it makes no sense. So
exactly.
it's like,
Right,
who's being
right.
shady?
Right. And then my younger sister, when she was born, she basically went right into the system. So as soon as she was born, they already had adoptive parents for her apparently because she was adopted when she was 8 days old. So it was a different case with me where I had to go through the system. I had to live with different people before I was adopted. And then my brother, of course, he just remained in the home.
Yeah, you know what's
So
wild to
yeah,
me though? This is what's wild, because this is where we talk about, and we need to talk about this, is that the system does target Black families, and we know this,
they
and this is
do.
where it kind of feels targeted,
They
because
do.
I personally know somebody. I'm not going to say, like, I'm not going to give away the
Hmm.
details because I don't know if they
Right.
want this. But one, two, three, four, five kids, was
Hmm.
pregnant with the last one. The four were taken into foster care, then taken in by family. The
Hmm.
fifth kid, they said, foster, like CPS said, we cannot take this child that is not born yet because we have to give her an opportunity to change. So
Hmm.
she was allowed to keep the fifth child up into a point, like 6-8 months, when they were like,
Hmm.
and now we start to notice the neglect and the abuse.
Hmm.
So to be adopted automatically by 8 years old, while we know that there are other people on the streets having babies and they're not even doing anything about it,
Right.
we have to look at this and say, something is shady.
Right,
Like,
especially because for
something is
one,
happening.
yes, especially because for one, I know that my mother probably did not consent to her youngest child being adopted because I know my mother, I know Brooke, I know her, and I know that she would not have went for that because as much as, obviously none of her children, she doesn't take care of any of them, but she does have like a sort of like possessive nature of
It's
us.
an
Like
under,
we
yeah,
are her
yeah,
children, and she's
yeah.
very like possessive of us. Like those are my kids. She always says those are my children. So I know, first of all, I
Mm,
know that she did not agree to that. So I don't know
right.
how that
They
happened.
go
And
to
second of
grandma.
all,
Like, that's the
right.
process.
And second of all, I was a baby when I was taken. So honestly, I feel as though it was just a situation where they took me because I was a cute little light-skinned baby, and they knew
Girl,
that
you're still
I
cute.
would
Like,
be right. Like, and they knew right, and they
but
knew that
yeah.
they could sell me. And
Well,
they
but
didn't.
we have to step back for a second, because they took advantage of someone who was in a horrible situation
Right.
and said, there is nothing she can do to stop us.
Right.
That's what they did. Like,
Right.
like when we look at the file and it was like, oh, you were taken, but your brother wasn't taken. Then your
Mhm.
youngest sister, who wasn't even born yet, was
Right.
essentially adopted out from
Right.
a woman who's living on the street and kind of being with grandma, but not being with grandma. And it's like,
Right.
hold to the phone. There's
Right.
some shady stuff happening. And we know
Right.
this because there's other families out there that have said no, like grandma, grandpa were fighting, aunt and uncle were fighting. The system said no. They still took the
Right.
kid. They still adopted it out. Nobody's seen the kid
Right.
since. And we
Right.
know that. Like, that
And
happens.
to add, my brother, he is now, I'm 19, he's 21. And
Mm-hmm.
like there was no like, obviously his upbringing wasn't ideal because, my mother's a drug addict and
Right.
she's coming in and out
Right.
of the house, but he's fine. He graduated school. He's literally an amazing young man. Like I am so proud of him. Like he takes care of my grandmother. My grandmother now, she's unfortunately, like, essentially, I'm not really gonna say on her deathbed, but she is not okay. She's sort of in her final
Yeah.
stages. He's taking care of
Yeah.
her. He's cooking for her. He's working, like, he's doing
Yeah.
so many amazing things. And, he's told me, like, hey, yeah, my upbringing wasn't ideal, but I knew that I was loved and I knew that I was cared about.
Mm.
So it's, like, they didn't even give them a chance. They didn't even give my grandmother a
No.
chance.
Well, and that's
So,
what's crazy to me because and a lot of people might be listening and be like, Denisha, you're making a lot of assumptions that the system is just out to get people. And I'm like, well, here's the deal. Like,
they
I was
are.
also a form of foster youth. And you know how hard it was for me. And literally what my CPS worker told me was, you are a white girl, no one's gonna believe you. So you should just shut your mouth. And he's like, I'm not doing anything. Like, and then to threaten me, what he would say would be things like, oh, well, it'll be really easy to adopt your little brother or little sister out. They have blonde hair, blue eye, or they're super cute. Like, he would say
Right.
this. And
Right.
so what we hear is that there are several parents out there who have said, yeah, I experienced the same thing. Like, my caseworker
Right.
threatened me. It's not in the notes though. Yeah, because they're not going to
Right.
notate
They
that they
do
threatened
that.
us.
They do that.
And it happens, and it's not
Yes.
everybody, but it is systematically known that this stuff is
Yes.
happening, and we see it where it's like, okay, what is why, and really, like, there's so many reasons that I think that there are whys, but I do think that there is a group of people out there that believe, first off, that they just believe Black people don't matter, and I'm like, I'm gonna punch you in the face. Then there's people who are just like, oh, this is a money machine, because there are people out there who are like, I want to adopt an ethnic child. And so
Right.
it's like,
Which is
how
weird.
people are weird. But then there is well, I have to be like, there's so many caveats. And sometimes there's people in the system who are actually trying to help. And they're just like, well, we know she's a drug addict. We know she's a prostitute. We know that the kids are not safe. But then again, all the children should be removed, not just one. But we have this
Right.
weird thing happening where it's like, oh, one kid's taken, but the rest are stayed. And the other ones are like, hey, like, still being abused here.
Right. Like,
For me, it took 15 years. I was 2 when the abuse started. It took 15 years for them to finally say enough is enough, after 5 months of a parent going, please take them. Like, our bio parent being like, please take them. And then they finally acted, only because we were all in dangerous situations.
right.
And it's like, but other people have told me, like, girl, like, it was day 1 CPS was called and we were taken
Right.
like that.
Like, my mother could breathe and the police would be at our door. Like, and I'm gonna be real, like, she's really.
It's not every, like, some like, I've had other friends who are white who are in the system too, and they were like, girl, I got taken like this, like, and I'm
Right.
like, I don't know, like, my place was shady. Like, they were doing some
Right.
things. But
Right.
it's true, like, and it might not be all the same everywhere, but there are people being targeted. Like, we've seen this with people who are Indian, like, they've said the same thing, like, Native Americans. We've seen that, like, they have been targeted, that, like, drug tests were falsified, things like that. We hear this and we're just it makes me mad. It makes me mad.
It's
because
crazy.
it's like, families are broken up for things that are not true, or things where it's like, if they had maybe given your mom more resources, maybe she would have gotten out of it. Like, we don't know. And that's one of the things that we always have to ask. Like, would it have made a difference? We don't know. But why not try? Why not try?
And the problem for me is that, like, my mother wasn't even the one that was raising us. It was my grandmother. So it's just,
so why not give her the support to do it?
And the funny thing is that after I was removed, so she was already raising my sibling, and then it's really funny because my uncle went and had a child, and my grandmother was raising that kid too. So you took one kid, you took 2 children, because then my sister was born. You put them in the foster care system. Meanwhile, my grandmother, my grandmother's raising these children. So what's up with that? So it's very weird. But what can you do? What can you do?
This comes back, but this is also like, girls are taken, but boys are not. And in a Black family, what can you do to really destroy a family generationally? You take away the men, and you just leave them. Like, you let them figure it out. And we know the statistics for Black men being in prison. We know the statistics for them getting into trouble. We know these things. So it's like, kind of, you sit back in it and go, oh, you take the women and the little girls and you move them and you break them. You hope for the best, but then you leave the boys to fend for themselves, and then they get, in trouble, and they do things that they're not supposed to. And that, I think that's like, it's just wild. Like, it's wild where it's like, but like, my brothers were also, like, left behind. And the girls were put in to
Right.
systems, and then, you know, with my sibling and my like sister and stuff like that, like, but I was put into foster care, and then like at 18 they were like, bye, see you later, we don't care about you. So but
Right.
it was like, okay, why would you do that though? Like, and I always hear it, it's like, well, boys are stronger, boys can get through it, boys, you know. So it's also neglecting the boys, where like
Right.
that's horrible. Like your brother should
Right.
have had support and love. And unlike, I know he said like, I know I was loved, but like in my head I'm like, the perfect system, it's never going to be perfect, it's never going to exist. But what if we had surrounded your grandma and said, oh, okay, she has diabetes, so let's get her to her appointment and then move the visitation.
Right.
Shocker, super simple to do. Like, but we spend so much more money putting kids in foster care than
Right.
helping the families that are eligible and able to take care of these children, but we don't wrap
Exactly.
around them to give them support. So
Exactly.
okay, so we have issues. We've got issues. We should have
We've
shirts
got
that just like,
issues.
we've got issues.
We've got
But
problems.
so there's that side for you.
Yes.
Then there's the side, and I don't think people understand this, as it is possible because of the prostitution that you don't know who your bio family is on your dad's side. Then is that
Right.
correct to assume?
Well, I know, but contact is, can't really make the contact happen because there's a lot of secret children on that side of the family. So I can't, everyone's just like, yeah, we know you exist, but don't talk to us because we don't want our spouses to know that you exist. So I know some of my cousins, and that's about it. And I found them through Ancestry. But
Okay, so I'm gonna ask the hard question.
yeah.
The dad said, I don't want you contacting?
No, so this is where
Or
it gets,
a family member said, do not?
this is where it gets really, really weird. So on Ancestry, I matched with my aunt and her child, two of her children. So she has one child that she has raised with her husband. She has another child that she had when she was a teenager that she put into foster care. But the thing is that she never told anyone about that child. Her husband does not know. Her children do not know. And when the child came and said, hey, you're my mother, she was like, no, I'm not. And all of the children just believe her. So when I came in and I was like, I contacted one of her children and I was like, hey, you're my cousin, your mother's my aunt, which means that whoever her brother is, that's my father. She was basically like, my mother doesn't have any children and she also doesn't have any siblings. So yeah, we
So
can
it's
have,
generational.
yeah. So she was like, oh, like we can have a relationship, but my mother is not interested. And her mother then proceeded to delete her entire Ancestry account. So it's very clear that they don't want to be found. And I honestly don't really care enough because for me, I just wanted to know what they looked like. I was never really interested in meeting my father because of the whole prostitution thing. I mainly really only wanted to meet my mom's side of the family. So meeting him would have just been a curiosity thing. Like I didn't really want a relationship. So I was like,
I'm all
okay,
like, do you even look good for
right,
it?
right. I was like, okay.
Sorry, that's just where my broken heart goes.
I was like,
This is the reality, and this is what we, first off, like, I think it's not, someone might hear this and be like, well, yeah, but your story is more complicated, Melody, because it was a prostitution situation. And I'm like, no, this is an adoption situation. Like, this is
right,
very real for a lot of adoptees.
right,
Now, there are situations that we do know where it's like, a teenager had a baby, put him up for adoption, was not allowed to have contact with this family because of the adoption
mhm,
rule of like
right,
closed adoption. We
right,
know that exists. And then, there's this beautiful reunification, but it's
mhm,
awkward and we don't talk about that.
right,
Like, but then there's a situation like yours where, and this is the sad reality where a lot of adoptees are going through this, is it's literally, you reached out and you were met with not rejection, but complete, do not contact us. And that's not rejection.
right,
Rejection is just like, no, thank you, not today. But this is like, don't ever. Like, we don't
right,
want you asking questions. We don't
right.
want you at all. And it's just like this, like, what did that feel like?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, I was just sort of, honestly, I'm a very, like, humorous type of person. So, like, let's say if
Me
this
too.
happened with my mother,
I'm like, I
I
don't
would have
want
been,
you either.
yeah, right. Like, if this had
I
happened
don't
with my
like
mother, right. If this had happened with my mother, I feel as though I would have been upset because I had always dreamed about meeting her. But with it happening with my
Yeah.
father, I always knew that he was like, I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it. I always knew that he was probably a piece of trash. So when his
Right.
family was like,
Because of the prostitution
oh, right,
situation.
right. And if
Yeah,
you're gonna
that
take
makes sense.
advantage of a prostitution, that tells me all I need to know about you. So when his
Yeah.
family reacted to me like that, I was just like,
You're
like
like,
y'all are
well,
acting,
you're
y'all
like,
acting,
yeah, not surprised.
right.
I'm
Like
not
you're
surprised.
acting
Yeah.
like you're the catch, honey. I'm the catch. Cause what are you? Like, what are you? So I was like,
You need a
okay,
shirt that's like, I'm the catch. I'm the
right.
catch here.
So I talked
But
to my
it's true.
cousin and that's
Yeah.
it. And I'm fine with it. I literally just laughed and was like, okay. And especially when she deleted her Ancestry account, I was like, girl, you must be really scared about your secret being found. But
But
if
but
you're
does that could also mean that they have more secrets, and that's
right,
probably why they're like, dang, like people are finding me, and it's like,
right.
yeah, we are. But
Mhm.
that's the hard part, and I think you bring up a very valid point where it's just like you have to be in a very low place or a very low person to say yes, I'm gonna go and sleep with somebody like this that I have no idea who it is, literally a one night stand that you paid for,
Right.
and then like you just never see them again, and it's like, okay, this is happening across the board, and this is the part of
Right.
the prostitution stuff that we don't talk about and
Right.
or are aware of, that it's like, yeah, like one of two situations is that they may abort the child or they may have the child, and then that child
Mhm.
grows up in a very hard situation, and
Mhm.
most often than not, I would assume, I don't know, that it's the horrible situation, because this person is not doing, it's not glamorous, they're not sleeping with billionaires, they're not getting all this money, it's
Right.
they're going out on a street sleeping with complete strangers for $5, $10,
Right.
$2. Like that's prostitution, where it's like
Right.
that's the majority of what prostitution is. Where
Right.
it's not $500. It's $5. It's I
Right.
need $2 more to go get this drug, $2, and that like that's heartbreaking when then you find out, okay, now they have a kid and they're still doing all this stuff, and then you're like, you're born into this, and you're just like, yeah. Like
Right.
that's a heavy thing, and I know like both of
Yeah.
us joke around a lot because it's just like we did just
Yeah. Yes.
God made us humorous,
We're like,
man. He was like, if I'm gonna give you trauma, I'm gonna make you both
let's make
funny
you funny. Let's make you funny.
and
Yeah.
good looking. Look at him. He
Yes.
was
Like
just
we're like,
like, he was like,
yeah.
let's get
So
some funny bones up in here because it's gonna be a
yes.
rough ride. But
Yeah.
what we do know too is that that was never God's design for your life. Like
Yeah.
we know that, but it's still like, I'm sure that there's those moments where it hits you and you're like,
Yeah.
dang, dude, like Lord, like this is not okay. My heart
Right.
breaks for your mom, I'm sure yours does too, but then I'm
Yeah.
always like met with like, what if, like what if someone stepped in and was like, hey, there's another
Mhm.
way, like would she have taken it? I have no idea, but it would be worth a shot. But what
Right.
we do know is that people look at someone who is on the street selling their body like that they're trash, that they don't
Yeah.
look at them and say, yeah, you're a human sitting in front of me.
Right.
It's, I have a moment and I'm going to use it. And that's it. That's the extent of what they think. So this
Mhm.
careless act that people are doing, they're feeling a need. But this is where the issue, like social media is glamorizing. TV, it glamorizes prostitution
Yes,
and
it does.
sexuality. And we lose the opposite side because we only ever see like the cop show where it's like, oh, the prostitute's arrested again and everybody knows who she is. And it's like, hey, girl, like, watch yourself out there on the streets. And I'm like,
Right.
that's all you ever hear. But then it's like you don't see the opposite side
Right.
of your life and then how heartbreaking it is. So with you sharing on social media, I know you've said about a year ago, what
Mhm.
has been the response back? Because I know it's
Well,
crazy.
yeah,
Some
yeah,
of these
yeah.
comments I'm
So,
like, girl,
yeah, so like for the most part, it hasn't really been too bad. I would say the biggest thing for me is that I see a lot of times, and this is also, I talk about this a lot about how most of my friends are older than me, and I don't really mesh well with college students,
mm,
mainly because of just the immaturity, just with my
great.
upbringing, I've been through so
Yeah.
much, and I feel like I'm just at a different point in my life. So I see a lot of them
You have to
post
age
things.
quicker. Yep.
Yeah, so I see them post a lot of very like insensitive things about adoption and abortion and foster care. Like literally just a few minutes ago, I was just talking to someone that goes to my school, and they posted something like, F them kids, get that abortion and then adopt a child from foster care. And I was like, I responded and I
That's
was
not the
like,
answer.
I literally told
Ugh.
them, I was like, this is like very offensive. It's insensitive. It's a very big no-no in our community. And
I thought you were gonna say
we
the F word,
all
and I was like,
know, no. And it was like, we all know
yeah.
that abortion and adoption do not go hand in hand. That is a big thing. Abortion and adoption do not
And
go hand
neither
in
does abortion and
hand.
foster care. Like, and
Right.
that's the argument that me
So,
and you have been like, so
yes.
continue because we got a whole nother
Yeah.
conversation.
Yeah. And so when I told her this, she was like, oh, like, I don't think, like, because she was reposting what someone else was posting. She was like, I don't think the
Oh
person
my
meant
God.
that. And so I told her, I was like, intent is bigger than what you
Perception.
meant. And she's currently
Perception
like,
is
I
different than
haven't,
intended.
right, and I haven't continued the conversation because we're doing the podcast, but she's still like basically trying to tell me that like she's justified in what she's saying, and I'm like, I feel like if I'm
Nope.
telling you to not to do something, then you don't do it. And mind you,
Yeah.
this is a black individual, and I used an example. I was like, as a black woman, if we tell like white people like you can't use racial slurs, and white people are just supposed to listen and not really question it. So as an adoptee, if I'm telling you not to
Right.
say something about my community or to bring my community into abortion, I should not have to defend myself about it. And the fact
Right.
that I have to just shows how much people do not think of us as anything, as we're not considered until politics get involved. We are not
No, I
thought
know.
about until politics get involved. And that is
Yeah.
what I've been dealing with the most, is people want to bring my life into politics, and I have to constantly explain to them why they are literally just statistically inaccurate. Statistically inaccurate. There are so
Yeah.
many, like, there's just so much to it, and you can't just
Right.
say things like that. So that's really been the biggest thing that I've had to deal with, is people just saying, oh, like, why don't, like, oh, just get an abortion. And a lot of times people don't even realize that when people don't get abortions, most of these women actually do keep their children, and they're not the children that end up in the foster care system. The people that are in the foster care system
Right.
are children that were neglected. A lot of it has to do with racism, like in my case, where I feel as though, like, there was a lot of justified removal in my case, but there was also a lot of like, oh, we just want a baby, and if this grandmother can't make one visitation, then we're just not going to
Yeah.
let her see her child,
Right.
see her grandchild.
Well,
You know?
So, okay, so I'm not looking off to the side to be like distractive. So I wanted to look something up because so here we have to take a step back because I'm all about like the research and the numbers, and
Yeah.
because people use this like, well, they should have just aborted the kid, or what I
Right.
have been told is, well, they should have also like, I've told people that I have struggled with depression and anxiety, and there were moments of suicidal like ideation, and someone was like, well, didn't you wish that you killed yourself? And I was like, no. Did you wish that your parent got abortion? No. I wish that my
Right.
parent loved me, and I wish that my family supported my parents differently and called them out and made them change, and like that someone looked at me and said, you are worthy of love. Like that's what I
Right.
wish.
Yes.
So in 2023, there was 1,026,700 abortions. Okay.
Mhm.
In 2023, same report is that it is estimated that Black women are the most ones to go for abortions. The highest rate, 38%. That's insane to me.
Right.
Okay, now in 2023, so here, this is where we're going to break up this difference.
Right.
Foster care number stats. We had in 2023 355,000 children, over that number, in foster care.
Right.
So people were like, well, then yeah, that you would avoid foster care. When abortion was made legal in 1970, there were 500,000 kids in the system. Today, there are over 355,000 in the system. However, there are over, I believe, let me look, I don't like saying the wrong thing, in kinship care. Kinship care just in 2023, 7.8 million children living in homes of their relatives. It's not an abortion issue.
Right.
It is a systematic issue. It is if
Right.
they wrapped around your mother, you guys would not have been put in foster care. If they wrapped around your grandma, who was already taking care of you guys,
Right.
that would have happened. But what we
Right.
do is we go, oh, it's easier just to have, and someone said this and I said, oh my God, that's it. It is
Right.
easier to say, well, it's an abortion issue, and
Right.
walk away from the conversation.
Right.
It is harder to stay in a conversation to say, let's be strategic. How should we have made it different for your grandma?
Exactly. Looking for my charger.
Yo,
But
go
yes,
die
I'm like,
on your own,
no,
girl.
don't die on
I
me.
hate
I
when
was
like, Okay, pause. Let's add some humor because that's pretty heavy stuff that we talked about.
Yes.
Phone, when you send me a screenshot of your phone, Melody, and it is at 2%, you stress me out.
No, that's, guys, so everyone listening, that is a big thing with me. My phone is always on its like deathbed,
Last leg. And she's like, look at this comment. And I was like, Melody, charge your phone.
And she's just looking at my phone. And the main
Mine
issue
is
with
at
me,
98%. Look,
it's
98%.
because like
Right
sometimes I don't even know how it got this low because I haven't really been on it today. I think I just forgot to charge it. You know,
Girl, you might
I don't
need to
know.
get a new phone. Like,
It's
might be
that I
That's
actually, yeah, because it goes down really fast. I actually am planning on getting one within the next year or two, but I'm like, oh
either
my God.
that or go in and delete, like, look at your apps. And guys, I love this because we're
Mhm.
also tech nerds. Go
Yes.
into your apps to see which one is draining the battery and then look at
Oh.
your battery health on your iPhone. So
You'll have to show
you're
me how to
welcome.
do that because earlier, so guys,
You'll be
earlier,
jealous of my
Danisha,
98%.
I was, yeah, seriously. I had to text Danisha because I knew she would know. I was like, can you show me how to schedule a text? Because really, like, even though I'm young, I'm 19, I am not technologically advanced for many reasons. So
Yeah.
I really I don't know. Like,
Yeah, and
I
that's
don't know.
okay.
But that's
I was like,
okay.
if you have an iPhone, here you go. She's like, I have an iPhone. And I was like, girl, your phone is always at 2%. And honestly, though, I'm going to say this. You're going to be like, this is true. I feel like our phone battery life is a reflective of our personal battery life.
That is so true. Because that's exactly where I am. 2%. 2%.
The days that I'm like 98%, like I'm like, my phone's at 98%. I'm like, I'm feeling good. But yesterday was at 25%. And I was like, I'm feeling 25%. Like,
Yes.
anyway,
Yeah.
so that was heavy. So we're going to jump a little bit back in.
Yes.
So here again, the conversation is so much easier to just be like, and that's done because I threw out a number. And really what tends to happen, this is what we have talked about, is that when we start to throw things like, well, it's an abortion issue. Well, it's a, what's another one we hear? It's an adoption issue. Oh, it's a your parents didn't step up issue. It's like, no, it's a community issue. We are not doing community well. In the last 30 years, everyone has siloed themselves to, we can't even ask for sugar from our neighbors. 30 years ago, 15, 20 years ago, we could. Now, in the last 15 years, you ask your neighbor for sugar and they're like, excuse me. They won't even answer. They're like, who is it? And I'm like,
right. And they're looking on their Ring camera. They're on their Ring camera like, oh, it's
like, hello.
Oh, it's Betty.
And it's like, and here's the sad thing, and this is when I was in high school, we asked the neighbor for milk, and they called CPS for that.
Jeez. See, this is why people don't talk to other people, because it's like you do something and they just want to call someone on you.
That's exactly what the conversation was like. Hey, don't ask that neighbor every, whatever. It was, okay, then don't ask anyone for help now, because if you tell anybody, they're going to report it. And that's like, it's wild to me because we have forgotten and gotten away from community. What would have happened if community had stepped in with your grandma?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. I'm sure there would have been someone being like, hey, they're taking advantage of you. Nope. There's an attorney who you can talk to pro bono. There's the system. You could get state aid to help you and your kids. You can do. Like, we know this now. We didn't know this in the situation.
Right.
That's what's wild to me. And it's even more wild to me when we have shared our stories. And as you start to get some videos go viral, people are like, you're dumb. You should have just done this. And I'm like, hold up. I didn't have that information. So you even saying like, hey, I'm 19 and I'm not technology advanced. It is not a bad thing on you at all. It is, there are situations where it's, you haven't had the electronics, you haven't had the time to look through it, you're in survival mode, whatever else it might be. Those things are very real, but what we do is we come to every situation with the knowledge base we have today, not what we had 10 years ago, 15 years ago. So when we do that, we're going to come off really pretentious and rude. And I remember I had shared something. It was one of the videos. I'm going to do like a recap of all like the worst comments of 2024. And one of them, like, I pulled out because I was like, oh my God, this is crazy. I had shared something and someone was like, that's lame. What you should have done is da 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 da. And
people really love to come with for you.
She goes, oh, they do. I was like, I know why they come for me, but whatever. girl, I'm gonna say it. It's because I am a white woman, and that's gonna sound really
Exactly.
weird because people are gonna go,
It's
"What?" And
true.
because
It's true.
people have literally told me that, and this person did. She's like, "You're a white woman. Abuse doesn't happen to you like that. You don't know what you're talking about." And I said, "Hey, at the time, I was 15 years old. I
Right.
didn't know." I had rights. My CPS worker did this. And she's like, that's not true. They're not allowed to do that. And da da da. My mom is a supervisor with the Child Protective Services in this other state.
Yeah, they
And I
always do that. Like,
Yep.
do you
And so I said,
do you live in California? No,
I
then
was
be
like, ma'am,
quiet.
ma'am. I'm like, we were just commenting back and forth. And I said it. I was like, look, here's the deal. In my state is very different. We have a reunification. And I like broken down. And this person's like, I don't have time to read your comment. And I was like, then why are you commenting?
Right.
But she straight started her conversation with, what do you know? You are a white woman. Abuse does not happen to you as bad as someone of color. And I was like, bullcrap, dude.
Which
It
is
doesn't
crazy.
matter. Abuse does not target, like,
It
when
doesn't
comes
target
to,
race.
like, you can't, it's not gender specific. It's not race specific. Is it
Right.
worse in the system for certain people? Yes.
Yes.
But abuse does not discriminate or look at someone and say, you're not going to have
Right.
this bad. And that's what was so wild about my caseworker was like, he literally told me that every time he wanted to. You're a white girl.
Right.
No one's going to believe that you were abused. You're a white girl.
Right.
Your dad is better at talking. Your mom, people are going to look at you guys and say like, you're crazy. And then it gets worse, like middle class people that have been in the foster care system. They were like, I was ignored for so long because they're like, but your family has money. Your house looks good. And it's like, did you see the bruises?
That's literally yes, because when I was
Like,
adopted, it was the same thing. I was adopted into an abusive household, and I remember when CPS came to our house, I swear as soon as she saw our house, she was just like, because when she had talked to me at school, she had been so like, I'm just so sorry, and like
yeah.
just feeling
And then
so
they see the
bad
house.
for me. Then they see the house and she's just like, and I'm like, okay, thank you.
So
Okay.
here's what was okay. I wanted to make sure we plug this is that if you are a former foster youth, you can access, you might be able to access your file by calling your county and requesting that they give you a copy of your file. It may cost money. They may say no. You
I
can go
did
to
get
the
my
judge
file.
and get it.
Yes.
So in my file, I just want to plug that because some people still don't know that they get access to it. But former foster youth are supposed, in most states, there is a law that is supposed to allow you to have your foster file. So in mine, 2 weeks before we were taken away, there was a CPS worker who came in and notated, everything is good, house looks great, food is in the fridge, kids look well behaved and maintained, and da 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 da. 2 weeks later, a cop came into our house and is like, there are broken windows, there is wire coming out of the ceilings in places kids cannot reach. There's we are bug infested with mice, lice, and roaches, and like other bugs. And so it was like, that doesn't happen in 2 weeks, y'all. Like, and he even said, he's like, there is a smell to the house that cannot be 2 weeks. Like it was like he noted, he was so, and I understand, like I was so grateful for that police officer because he took the time to take pictures and note stuff that he was like, this is a long-term issue that takes like years to get to this point. But people would not look at the house. They would just look at how my parents talked. So it's like, this is a very common issue. And this is, again, where community failed to step in and step up and say, hey, no more.
Right.
This is the issue of foster care.
And this just proves
issue of anything else.
Yeah. And this further proves what you said. This further proves what you said about how like people are saying that, oh, because you're a white woman you can't be abused. People think that if you're middle class or rich that you can't be abused.
100%.
I was adopted into an upper middle class home. People thought my life was perfect just because my house was big, and like that wasn't the case. So,
well, and
like
that happens with foster care too, like because I went into a home for like a couple weeks and like the house looked good, the house was nice, they locked the food, they were like, you can't eat until this time, you're not allowed to call anybody, and I was supposed to get like a call every day and I wasn't allowed to, and it was like, you can't use the water for more than 3 seconds. Literally, they're like, turn it on, you turn it off, you do not waste water, you turn the lights off if you're in the bathroom longer than 2 minutes, and literally they would come walking around and shut the light off on you.
Wow.
And it was like, how is that not like being really stingy? First off, like some people would be like, that's not abuse, and I'm like, it is basically saying you don't matter in this home. It is my way, not your way. You don't get to be comfortable here. You're going to do it and really, like, no, it's not physical abuse or emotional abuse, but it's kind of along the lines of like torture, because it's just
Yeah,
like,
yeah,
hey, you can't be in the bathroom washing your face with like
yeah,
warm, you can't
yeah,
even let the water warm up because you have to get in and get
yeah.
out. And so people started to notice when I was in my 20s, where they were like, girl, like, because I was like youth leading at my church at that point,
Mm-hmm.
and they're like, yeah, you like take like literally 2 to 3 minute showers, like, but you don't like take a shower. So how do
Yeah.
you like shave your arms or your legs if you want to, or like, you do wash your hair? And I'm like, yeah, I just try to get
Mm-hmm.
really done like really fast. And they like, people were like, wow. And I'm like, that was like my everyday. But then it's like, as
Yeah.
I've gotten older, I'm like, oh, there was so much learned neglect that
Yeah.
it was out of fear of like taking too much from people, that
Right.
I couldn't even stay in the I'm taking just enough for me. Like I would literally
Right.
take way less and then
Right.
walk into rooms and like don't exist. You
Right.
know, and that again is like, oh, yeah, abuse doesn't discriminate. It doesn't have an
It
income
doesn't.
level. Is it easier if you're in poverty to be targeted? 100%. Is it easier to be
Mm-hmm.
targeted because of race? Yes. But it does not, the abuse itself, neglect itself does not discriminate or look at someone and say, oh, I'm not going to touch you. Like, it's not a person. Abuse is the person doing it.
Right.
And I
Right.
think that's what's wild to me, is that we can't, because we stop the conversation at an abortion argument, we
Mm-hmm.
can't ever get to the conversation of how we're feeling in a community sense.
Right.
And that's really why I think when we look at it and we go, well, abortion is on the same level as foster care. Abortion is the adoption topic. I was like, nope, they are two separate topics. Because
Two
here's the
different
other
things.
difference. Abortion is about the child who is not here yet. Foster care and adoption is about the child who is here. Both of them are very hard topics. Both of them come with a lot of shame and guilt and horribleness. But then what we do is we go, let's clump them all together. It's like, y'all, like, this isn't Play-Doh. No, this isn't paint. Like, this is not like, let's make a new color with this. Like,
Right.
these are separate conversations. And like, I've seen
Right.
so many reels and videos where people are like, oh, it would just be better. And I'm like, no, it wouldn't, because it doesn't help the child who's here. Those are separate
Exactly.
conversations. The same thing with it is a separate conversation with your story, where it's like there is foster care due to neglect and abuse, and then there is foster care due to drug addiction and prostitution issues,
Right.
and then not supporting your grandma. And
Right.
it's like those are different conversations. They're in
Yeah.
the same umbrella, but we can't even put abortion in that same umbrella,
Right.
because it's not the same umbrella. But what we have done is we've said, okay, Melody, don't talk about it. Like, you're making me uncomfortable. And it's like, I'm sorry. No, I'm not sorry. Like, I'm gonna
Right.
keep
Like.
talking about this. Like,
Right.
this is
Right.
my story. This is a part of
Right.
my situation. It's not a part of who I am as an individual internally, but it is something that happened to me. And I think
Right.
that's what's wild, is that I'm so grateful that you're sharing your story, because you started sharing about like the hardship of being reunified with both sides. And like, so
Yeah.
what was that reunification like? You met your mom.
Yeah. Yeah. So I actually met her. I literally met her in person for the very first time over this past Thanksgiving. Which was
Okay.
It was not really what I expected. So first of all, like when we first began talking, like about a year ago, which is when I first like actually like spoke to her, she was very emotional, very like, oh my goodness. But when we met in person, she was so ashamed of herself that she
Mm.
could barely even really look at me. Like I could tell that she was so happy to see me, but she just kept looking at the floor. Like I said, she has autism, so she was doing her little rocking back and forth in her chair, like just like rocking and just
Mm.
staring at the floor and couldn't really look at me. Um, so it was a little heartbreaking, but at the same time, I felt like so much like I felt a piece of myself like connecting because for people that have literally grown up with their mom and dad their whole life, I don't think there's any words for me to describe what it's like to not only not grow up with your biological mother, but to also be an adult and you literally have to tell people I've never met my mother before. I don't even know what she looks like. I've never laid
Yeah.
eyes on her. Like that is just like the strangest thing ever. So meeting
Yeah.
her for me was like finally getting some closure. Like I was finally able to
Yeah.
say I met my mother, like oh my goodness, like my mother.
Yeah.
And that's just such a weird sentence to say. Like, I just got
I
to meet
met
my
my
mother.
mom.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so it was honestly like it was the same thing where I almost feel like maybe I'm sort of detaching a little bit and that I didn't really feel a lot of emotion at that point. Like when I first spoke to her over the phone, I was very emotional, like I was very happy and excited, but meeting her in person, I was mainly just like the reality of everything that I had gone through to get to that point hit me and I
Yeah.
was just like, you know?
Right here. But that's
Yeah.
also something I think that a lot of adoptees have also expressed that I've heard from the few that I know is that it was like some of them were like, yeah, that was completely disappointing. And then
Yeah.
others are just like, I'm still processing this because it's wild to me. And it takes
Yeah.
years to process because there's all of the other stuff that people don't want to talk about is like the abandonment your whole life that you felt, the questions you have had. I haven't had
Mhm.
my mom in my life since 13 because she wasn't allowed to be. And it is like the last time I like remember, I was probably like 11 or 12, but she was
Mhm.
also like emotionally disconnected. So like
Right.
even though she was there, she was a shell. So it
Mhm.
was like that's hard enough. I can't imagine like getting to that day and be like, okay, and it's not like what movies show. It's not like this,
It's
oh my
not.
God, and
It's
we
not
have all
this
these presents
emotional.
in this room.
It's not
No,
an emotional like running into your mom's arms. Like I was sort of like,
there's no room with all these presents from the
right.
last 20 something years. There's no like, I have been waiting for this day forever and I've been celebrating. It's just like this. It is awkward.
It was
And
awkward.
then
I
it's,
walked in and she was just
yeah,
sort of standing there. I just sort of looked at her and I was like, this is what I was like, hi. I was like,
yeah.
hi. And she didn't even,
You're, you're
she was like,
meeting a
oh,
stranger
yeah. She
who
was like,
you're
oh, hi.
biologically connected to.
Yeah, she was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
hi,
That's,
Ebony," because Ebony was my name at birth. She was like, "Oh, hi, Ebony.
yeah.
You're so." She was like, "You're so pretty." Um,
Oh, well,
and
thank you.
I was like, "Thanks."
Yeah, but you're
And
also like,
I, yeah,
cool,
yeah,
cool.
yeah, yeah,
It is, and I think that you need to be allowed to be able to sit in that. Is where it's
right,
like you're gonna process those emotions differently. I am not an adoptee. I don't know. I can only assume based off of like the psychology background that I have is that
right,
when there is that like that disconnect in the life of the
yeah,
mother to the daughter or the son, like there has to be those moments where it's just like it's not beautiful. It's not. It is one of those things that it's like we've missed so much time. And that like cuz that's how I feel like with my mom, it's like we've missed so much time that you have chosen not to get it together to find me and meet me and like apologize. And there's a lot there. I can't imagine it being like, okay, and now you have autism on top of that, and
right,
whatever other things where it's like they're not processing it that same way, and they're also having their own emotions and their own shame and guilt. And like you said, like she felt guilty and ashamed, and it was like what you had posted something that you said that she was afraid that you would look at her and think like, what was it that you
yeah. Because it's
posted?
like just like so she's a drug addict, and she used to be very beautiful
Yeah.
physically like on the outside, but when you do drugs for so long, it really you don't look
Physically
the
and
same. You
mentally,
don't
it
look
messes
good.
with you.
So she,
Yeah.
she at first didn't want to see me because she was ashamed of how she looked. And I'm very like
Yeah.
I'm very blunt with her because first of all she's my mother and second of all that's just my personality. And I was like, "Girl, I already know what she looked like." I guess that's just what I said. I was like, "I don't care." Um
Yeah.
and I
But like
said
that's
that
not, yeah.
you're the and what I had said, I said like, regardless of what you look like on the outside, you're the beautiful woman that God chose to be my mother. So
Mm.
it doesn't matter what you look like.
Well, and
I want to meet
the
you.
other thing, like what I don't think people realize too, is that this is not a woman who is mentally emotionally healthy. That's the hard part. Like when you're dealing with the mental health issues on top of that, and then the
Mhm.
mental disability on top of that, and then the drugs on top of that, people are not going to know and realize that this is not an interaction that me and you have. Like
Right.
we're mentally emotionally healthy. There is that, it's not that it's awkward, it's just like, now correct me if I'm wrong, you're the adult in the room with a woman who's an adult but is
Mhm.
not mentally an adult.
Right. Like I definitely do treat her like
A
I have
child.
respect for
Not
her,
on
but I
not
do,
on
yeah, I
purpose.
was gonna say like I treat her like a child. Like I treat her like she's my child. Like if she was my child, like
Yeah.
that's how I would treat her. Because there are definitely times like when I talk to her on the phone and she doesn't have a filter, so she will say mean things to my grandmother, and I will go and I will say, Brooke, that's not appropriate. You can't say that. But she'll be like, oh,
Yeah.
oh, I'm sorry, Ebony, and I'm like, yeah, you gotta do better. You gotta do better. So, you
Yeah.
know, she's different, and I just
And
have to work
that's
with
like
it.
a whole level, because it's not that, and that's why I'm saying it's like it's not like the movies. It's like, I'm so glad you got to meet her, but I know that there might be some disappointment with that, because it's not like
Mm-hmm.
the, can you please tell, it's like you're talking to a child who's in adult form, and you're just kind of like, okay, I'm just not gonna, we're not gonna be able to have that real and raw
Right,
conversation.
right,
But also, like, I'm not gonna get that relationship of, I'm the daughter, you're,
right,
it's gonna be like, okay, I know you, and like we have a friendship kind of thing, like a
right.
weird acquaintance. I
Yeah,
was in
that's pretty
class
much
with
what
you
it
one
is.
time kind of thing.
Yeah,
And like,
yeah,
thanks for pushing me out. like
yeah,
it is,
yeah.
and it is not, that's not trying to like to dismiss it or anything, but it's just like, that's the reality of when you add like mental health issues on top of that, on top of a trauma is a whole nother level of, just, I'm going to be honest, ugly. When you add
Mm-hmm.
mental health, it makes it complicated. When you add
Yeah.
drugs, it just makes it like, it feels impossible sometimes. And so it's not that like, you're not just gonna be like, yeah, that's cool, like, cool. There's gonna be these waves of emotion where you go through, where it's
Right.
like, yeah, I don't care. And then there's gonna be moments where you're like, oh, there's grief. Like,
Yeah.
I pictured this thing that wasn't, in hopes that it was going to be different, and then now it's like, yeah,
Yeah.
that this is really like, I have to, like, this is my bar. But then we still do the, well, you know. And I think that that's hard. I think it's just hard, it's just hard all
It
around. And I
is.
think that
It
that's the
is.
hard conversation, that when we can't get to that level of being honest with people, people are
Mm-hmm.
just like, yeah, you're good. And it's like, I'm not
Right.
good with
Right,
this whole
right. Yeah,
situation.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, is there anything else you would like to add before we end?
That's the gist. I mean, like that's
Girl, we
I would
covered
say the
so
biggest
much.
we
Foster care is
did.
complicated.
I
That's
think
what,
yeah, the main thing I
complicated.
just wanted viewers to understand is that it's not just a simple like right or wrong, yes or no.
Yeah.
Like it's very adoption and foster care is very gray. It's different for
Yes.
every adoptee and foster youth. Like not everyone has the same
Yes.
opinions. There's a lot of
Their own
beef
stories.
and drama within our own community.
Girl, I'm like,
Like
sometimes I'm like, no, sit down. And I'm like, dang, like we all have different stories
yeah,
and reasons of
yeah.
why we ended up there. And people try to assume in our own community, where we're like, oh, you must feel the same way that I do. And it's like,
I'm
nope.
like, no, yeah, or they do the thing where they're like, oh, if I don't agree with them, they tell me that I'm not out of the fog, as they say it, and I'm like, how are you gonna tell me that I'm not done processing because I don't agree with you, honey?
Girl, I'm so tired of that.
Me too.
I'm
They're
not
like,
in a fog.
oh,
I just have a different opinion.
right, like, can I have a different opinion and like you
Yeah,
just
me
take it?
too. Yeah, and that's where I think we're starting, like a lot of us are starting to pull away from that type of rhetoric, is that we're
I
just like,
am.
look, I'm going to say what I need to say, because and that's why we're all like, you'll hear us all say like, this is my opinion, not this is not our
Yeah.
community opinion. This is my
Yes.
experience. I don't have to stay in this, but also too, like, this is really complicated, because people will say like, oh, well, you're fine now, you're successful, you found your route, you found healing, you found
And I'm like,
religion, you found this. And you're just like, y'all, like, yeah, I did, but it's so hard. Like, each
yeah.
thing, like when you get married, you have kids, you graduate high school, college, get a car, get your license, you're doing it on your own. And it is that thing where it's like, you don't have a parent behind you going, good job, baby girl. Or
Right.
it's just like, you literally go home and you're like, good job, baby girl.
Right,
Like,
that's literally okay.
dang, like that
I'm so glad you said
hit
that.
me a little
I
bit. I was like,
forgot. Oh
shoot,
my goodness,
shoot,
I forgot to say that.
shoot.
I actually forgot to mention that. Like literally, so like as of now, just to give like a present update, like I literally don't really have any mother figures. Like when I have an accomplishment, like when I get my transcript back, like at the end of the semester, and I have like my 1A on there, like
Hey,
just kidding, I'm
girl,
gonna
let's
have my grades
go.
gonna be better, but when I have my grades on there, like I'm gonna be patting myself on the back, like like I don't have anyone. Like my adopted
And so
mother,
many people will try to say like, well, you can go find one. It's not the same thing, you
it
guys.
ain't,
Like,
no, it's not the same.
we are like, even with my friends, like their parents who have loved and
Yeah,
treated me like I could say like their own, there are still
yeah,
differences, even when it comes, like, especially when it
right,
comes to like Christmas and birthdays and like
right.
all the other stuff, is like, they're just like, happy birthday, but then like for their kid's birthday they took him
They
out
get
and
a
they did
whole
this big thing.
post and
Yeah, but it was
yeah,
just like, you're my kid, and it's like, I see that there's a huge difference.
Yeah.
And
So
it's
it's like
not that, yeah, it's just, it's
my
not the same.
yeah, so like my adoptive mother, we even though like, there was a whole thing with her, like she's really not she was not a good parent to me. And we both
Mhm.
recognize that. I speak to her, but it's very like friendship acquaintance type style. Like she does not give me advice on anything. She doesn't really ask for updates in my life. Like it's very like just how are you? I'm good. How are you? I'm good. Okay,
Yeah.
good. And then I'm like, "Oh, how are my siblings doing?" And she's like she gives me a little update. Like that's basically what it is. So like
Yeah.
she isn't someone I can go to. My bio mother, like obviously I can't go to her. I have like someone that I call my bonus mom, but like you said, like when it's my
It's just
birthday,
not
like
the
it's
same.
just not it's not the same.
It
Like she's
honestly
not
feels like, I would say, like, if I had to like categorize it, which is really hard to do, it just feels like we're more like friends or cousins, like second,
right,
third cousin remove, where it's like, hey, I've never
right,
seen you in my life. And then all of a
right,
sudden I'm trying to have an adult relationship with you. Sometimes it even
right,
feels more like being a coworker. Like,
right. Yeah, yeah.
if for those of you who are like, how, like, why, it's like, just because it's like, there, we know scientifically that biologically we have different connections with those who we are biologically related to. And as much as people want to say that like adoption can replace that, what we find is there is this missing this goal, this gap in our heart,
Mhm.
literally a hole in our heart,
Mhm.
where, I mean, not literally, figuratively, but whatever, there is a figuratively hole in our heart where it hurts. And it is something that when we sit in these conversations, it's like we know that we're not there. And even if the parent isn't telling us that we're not in the family, there is that fear as the when we find that we're adopted, or like we're, we don't have a parent. It's like, oh, okay, if I mess up, I'm out. Like your kid,
Mhm.
that never crosses their head.
Right,
Me,
right,
that's the only thought that crosses my head. And that might not
right,
be the message that I'm getting from somebody who loves me, but it is the
right,
message I'm telling myself, because it's like, don't screw this up. And
right.
that's, so it's just a weight that like the good Lord, like, I hope takes away someday, because it is reality
Yeah.
that we all have faced that. Like I hope that God can like give every single one of us that piece of like, we are loved and valued, and that hole
Yes.
can exist. And that doesn't mean we're bad or ungrateful. It just means that like we have a hurt that is
Right.
there, and it's deeping, and it is something that it's like, at like my wedding, I didn't have anybody walk me down. I walked by myself.
That's
And
what I always think about. Like I'm so sad
people
like
were
when
like,
I
well,
get
why didn't
married.
you ask somebody else? And I'm like, why did I have to fill the hole? And I
Right.
said that to someone, like, I didn't do a father-daughter dance. I did a sibling dance. And it was like me and my siblings. And like somebody was like, oh my God, like that, like people were telling me like, Danisha, like that's when we really realized it. And I'm like, oh, you didn't realize that like the father daughter dance, that's a tradition. I just did a me and my sibling dance, and like Mark did a
Yeah.
other son dance with his mom. But like I did a sibling dance, and there were several people who were like, girl, that's when I felt it for you, where it was like, oh shoot. And I'm like,
Right.
but if we don't let that hole exist, we can't work through it. And it's not something that's going to get healed because we worked through it. It's just something that it has to be able to exist. It just has to, not in pain, but just in reality of like, that's our reality. And if people see that and go, oh, I felt it for you, it's like, okay, now you understand a little bit. So it's
Yes.
like, if my only encouragement is to everybody is like, let the holes exist. Don't try to fill it with somebody else or something else, because that's where addictions
Yes.
happen. Just
Yeah.
let it exist. Let it be. And then let yourself mourn over it. Let yourself be upset of it. Let yourself ask the questions. Let yourself like get through the emotion where you're good one day and not the other. But it's like our stories are just complicated. And
They are. They
they're just
are.
wild. And then it gets more complicated like the more you add to it. But if you guys have questions, we want you to reach out. Do you have anything else you want to add before we end?
Yeah. I think that really that was the end. That was great. Make sure you follow
Yeah.
me on Instagram. I'm
Heck
Melody
yeah.
Adoptee.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep. Follow, ask
Yes.
questions, don't
Yes.
repeat stupid stuff.
Yes.
Do research.
Yes.
Sometimes people will just share things and not even think about it. So let's
They
let's
don't.
do better, so that way we have more education in the field of how to be a friend to somebody and how to be a good community. All right, you guys,
Yes.
follow along and let us know if you have any comments. Thanks for joining.
Thank you.